Hello, and welcome to an adventure like no other. Far more than what you have known, there is something far more to be known than you can ever know. And it is all about you, the real you, your real awareness with your intuitive senses. You were never taught that the real you, your real awareness, is operating 5 bodies in cause and effect, restricting creation. You have been taught to think that you are only a one-dimensional human person, with a mind and emotions, and with a very short lifespan on this planet Earth. More than what your mind can grasp is your intuitive senses that can be opened to see beyond all your restrictions. You have always had an opening to see beyond what you have known, and this has been purposely kept from you, and this is where you have heard rumors and stories about your nightly dreams. Your so-called dreams is your opening to your intuitive senses that will allow you, the personal you, to excel beyond what you have previously known. Everyone has intuitive senses, and very few people take advantage of what is possible by recognizing something more than their mind can understand. Creation has its place for all of us, and then there is all life, which is far more than anything than what can become with creation. Everything we experience is necessary for us to survive with whatever we choose and decide our life to be. New Kevin Smith is the great witness to something more than what can be taught and learned in any school. It can be so that when anyone first listens to Kevin's intuitive side experiences, also known as real side experiences, from what their personal mind has known, Kevin's manner of expression will at first be rather different to comprehend. This is where this introduction and reading the new books and Facebook groups will help. Have fun deciding. DUANE the Great Writer and Seer.
I shared on a relatively recent real side experience how it was revealed to me the Dark Force controllers' impending plans to induce a state in overall humanity which would allow for an even greater programming than has been taking place up until this point. Everything an individual, or indeed a species, experiences is dependent on agreement. The ideas must be present, installed in a consciousness, individually or collectively when it comes to entire species, that the corresponding effects that are the ideas' nature can feature. Absent of the ideas, and simulation can't follow, and in regards to the imposition of other individuals or species, required is it that those they desire to impose upon must agree, they must have the ideas that are the nature of the imposition, and in relation to the would-be oppressors or dominators, installed in their consciousness, or try as an individual or a species might, they will be unable to have any bearing on those they are wishing to experientially impact. Agreement as to humanity's suppression in relation to the Dark Force reptilians has been secured since the human species' inception, as they were originally an engineered, genetically tinkered race for the purposes of serving as a slave species. This then has been the foundation of the human experience ever since, the underlying bedrock agreement, that of being controlled by the dark forces, and expressed has been the corresponding simulated relationship between all involved ever since. Throughout humanity's experience has the control been gradually escalated and continues to be so, but for this to occur, for their circumstances to become progressively controlled and restricting, so this requires the ideas effecting this to be installed as agreements in addition to the overall foundation agreement of control, that which had been established from humanity's inception. The controllers have their various means and mechanisms where idea installation can be successfully implemented, generally through the presenting of ideas that have a certain surface one-dimensional appeal, but that are laced with additional and unseen ideas in affiliation, a little like downloading a file to one's computer, but which is accompanied by an unrealized virus or malware. For everything created via the body-vehicle mechanics, every thought, every intent is an idea, and should we agree with these ideas, we consciousness install them and experience their nature. If an individual has the intentionality to dominate, as insubstantial as thought forms may seem, they are no less potent as anything else featuring as a simulation in our experience. For everything assimilated is effected from ideas as formulated via the mind-body vehicles, and should we agree with what appears to have a beneficial merit, should that which has produced it harbour intent to dominate, as nothing can be present absent of a consciousness that manifested it, then we will be taking on these unseen idea intentionalities in addition to the idea that had a surface appeal, and will experience their nature, domination at the hands of the individual we had extended agreement to by virtue of the captivating surface idea that was their creation. Far easier is it in more recent technological times to install ideas into human consciousness, for where attention and focus is placed is a viable mechanism of agreement securing, and a steady bombardment of the themes and notions the controllers desire humanity's experience to reflect will be a constant through the computer games and television series and movies provided, and thus the dark force agenda for humanity's continued suppression has been able to escalate at a far greater velocity than in any previous era of its history. The dark force's want for control is incessant, boundless. The desire is for it to become absolute, and as I mentioned in the beginning, I was previously shown that through the agreements they had now secured, the ideas successfully implanted in human overall consciousness, so shortly would humanity be experiencing daily occurrences where at a certain time every human would become momentarily dormant. From the perspective of each human, nothing would be happening other than what seemed to be a state of bliss during these daily interludes into their usual routines. But in reality, these induced states would facilitate an even more effective means where programming of the human consciousness, the installation of ideas into it, could be achieved. A programming that of course would be for the purposes of advancing the agenda that is human experience restriction as the corresponding overall effect. For should the conscious mind be bypassed, so the ideas can be directly installed subconsciously, absent of conscious consideration and possible rebuttal, and with induced states, such as those experienced through the abilities of hypnotists, for example, or indeed as we switch off mentally through absorption into what is being presented to us via the television screens, we can be programmed directly and unbeknownst to us, presenting no resistance to the ideas being installed. And regardless of our being conscious of the ideas or not that are being consciousness placed, they still will affect their nature and become as our experience. These daily periods of bliss then would place humanity into a highly suggestive state, to the extent of being completely and momentarily switched off, as though a deep hypnosis, and where there would be an influx of idea programming being consciousness installed. Of course, these states of bliss would become apparent and realized globally. Their purpose, or indeed origin, would never be determined, and I would be shown how this phenomena would be reported through all mainstream media and news outlets as simply an anomaly with little cause for concern. And now, in this more recent real side experience, I would be shown a further verification that this idea, that of overall humanity's daily induced bliss and programming states, was indeed still set and intended to be implemented. For indeed, I would find myself standing in a random street setting during one of these daily bliss periods, but I could just as readily have been positioned anywhere on the earth, as this was set to be a continuous global occurrence involving every human of the planet, as I mentioned. Every human in my vicinity would cease what they were doing and become momentarily dormant, as though robots that had been switched off. They were effectively placed in a comatose or deep hypnotic state and receiving then their daily programming. As the weeks unfolded, as the period of bliss always would feature around the same approximate time, mid-afternoon, so humanity would more so prepare themselves for it, accepting it as part of their experience and working their schedules around these daily bliss periods. For as you can imagine, advisable was it not to be undertaking or involved in any operation or activity that could prove dangerous were one suddenly to switch off in the middle of doing so. I would then be featuring within various of these crowds of dormant humans during these bliss periods, though unaffected by that which was rendering humans dormant, simply standing and walking among them in more an observing capacity. For as we select the species we are to experience, we rather must take on the consciousness that is that species, and however it has been formulated, the ideas it comprises of. A little like selecting a particular computer game, we must upload to our computers the game's data file that we can participate within it. That effected from our own unique consciousness design will always be our body forms, that experience the ideas of our consciousness as a simulation, our consciousness that will now include the ideas that are the creational position we have selected, the ideas of the particular species consciousness we are to become a part of. Taking on the consciousness that is the human program will include the ideas that are agreements as extended to the dark force controllers. The human experience is one of suppression and control in relation to the reptilians, as I mentioned, and we now are embodying these same agreements as we become of the human experience. Were we to remain as a consciousness, a personal self-immersed individual only, locked into our creation, we fully embrace the idea agreements that are the consciousness, including those that are of the species we now are operating as. The additional species overall consciousness ideas we had to incorporate and take on in order that we could experience being as that species. Every individual that is human then will be subjected to whatever the overall human consciousness program happens to be, should they remain a personal self immersed and absorbed. Such an individual will experience then these bliss periods of programming with every other human, should such a situation come to pass. For although this idea agreement is present in human consciousness, for it to become as a current human experience, it must become as among those ideas at the forefront of a consciousness, so to speak, as only the ideas being held to in prominence are those being experienced at any given moment. For consciousness can only process certain ideas at a time, due to the addition of time ideas, which present a delay factor from cause to effect, and only allow that certain of the ideas of consciousness are presented at any given moment. Just like a movie, where every idea that formulates it is present on the disc, but only certain of the ideas are manifested at any given moment according to where along the movie's timelines we happen to be. However, for the individual who is embracing the awareness process that involves a facing and releasing of all ideas of consciousness, these will not only include their own, but the consciousness of the species they have taken on and currently are experiencing. An awareness becoming individual will be progressively less resigned to the idea restrictions that are the human consciousness, the majority of which will be ideas that are effecting as controlled circumstances in relation and as dictated and implemented by the dark force reptilians, including then such potential scenarios as these daily bliss periods. Expected can it be then that should new friends, those currently as part of the human experience, find themselves in such situations, they will not be, or less likely, subjected to that which unconscious personal self-immersed humanity will be. For the new friends would have released, or be in the process of doing so, the idea agreements which effect for them such experiential situations as these daily bliss states, and very likely be thus unaffected by them, and be walking among the prone and dormant humans when such occurs, as was the case here, where I would be present among the various individuals in the random street setting I would find myself within. And indeed, I would make contact with a particular group of participants in these potential human experiential scenarios that, although were subjected to the same periods of bliss, indicating they then hadn't released the agreements that ensured they could evade this daily occurrence, they were more aware than most. They had determined the insidious nature of these daily bliss periods, that they served as a detrimental and as a programming mechanisms, and had discovered a means by which they could avoid being subjected to them. For they would barricade themselves inside their homes during these bliss periods, and remove all Wi-Fi and electromagnetic technologies, including the ability for Wi-Fi to even be received. And so, as it transpired, these induced bliss states were in some way electromagnetically orientated, very likely carried on the very Wi-Fi that is prevalent in practically every building and street, and becoming more so widespread and accessible with every passing day. Interestingly, those that chose to mitigate the bliss state, or those that were unaffected by them, if they were individuals on their awareness of processes where the agreement ideas pertaining to such had been released, would become known to the vast bulk of unconscious personal self-immersed humanity, who not only were subject to these bliss states, but fully embracing and accepting of them also. A form of a prejudice or discrimination would manifest, only not born of a race, colour, or sexual orientation differentiation, but a divide line between those who were blissed daily and accepting of it, and those that were unafflicted, or had determined how to mitigate and prevent it through the removal of all Wi-Fi producing technologies, etc. And as the vaster proportion of humanity were of those blissed on a daily basis, those evading these states were in the minority, and would be subject to increasing levels of hostility and mistrust. I have shared on a number of previous real-side experiences that as those on their awareness processes are releasing idea agreements of consciousness, they are less resigned and limited. For we may take on the experience of being human, but we are not restricted by it. We are experiencing the ideas, but are not attached to them. And as we are not attached to the ideas that are the human experience, we are not bound to it. We can have other options and opportunities made available as alternatives. The personal self-immersed human is anchored by their experience, or the ideas that affect it, like a computer game that they are unable to turn off and exchange for another. A human, on their awareness process, is releasing attachment to the ideas that affect as the human experience. They progressively are positioning themselves that they can switch to alternate games, so to speak, should circumstances dictate, if situations on Earth that are the human experience become overly abrasive and no longer conducive for the awareness process. And so it has been revealed to me the various options made available for relocation to alternative planets or positions, and it falls on each individual then to have released the requisite agreements that these opportunities can be seized. We each effectively decide that we can be potentially relocated by virtue of an awareness process embraced, through intent set overall with the recognition of the all is. In this case, and where humans on the earth, those evading or unaffected by the bliss states, were the recipient of escalating hostility and abuse, and to the extent where it made little sense to remain earth-bound, so an option for planetary relocation was made available, and would take the form of accommodating alien body types as they implemented a rescue operation utilizing their various spacecraft. My impressions were of these craft and associated aliens being as part of the inbound to Earth alien armada, a fleet of assorted stepping up and becoming a more aware conglomeration of a species that have the intention of bringing humanity into their awareness confederation. But this can only be so according to the control that the Dark Force reptilians maintain, or indeed expand upon where humanity are concerned. If humanity's controlled circumstances are not lessened, and indeed escalate, this will not be conducive for the alien armada's objective, that of incorporating humanity into their confederation. But rather than the operation be abandoned Instead, the Armada will relocate whatever of humanity they can, in reality, whatever of humanity allow, by virtue of their agreement placement. If they remain locked into a consciousness, which remains as a dark force restricting in its nature and earth binding, they will deny themselves this option. And this experience would conclude there, with the vast bulk of humanity remaining unconscious, subjected to these daily induced states of programming bliss, but with a smaller proportion those able to evade the programming or beyond its agreement-based ability to impact, able to be relocated by the alien Armada. A potential overall humanity scenario then, where the Armada wouldn't be successful in regards to its ideal objective, only able to rescue a percentage of humanity, and the rest resigned to their decided fate. But as I mentioned, this will be but one of the many ideas present in human consciousness, and that this scenario comes to pass is dependent on it becoming as among the idea forerunners, and thus rolls out as a physical level actuality. But even then, should another agreement replace it prior to the effect being realized, then an alternative overall human experience will begin to roll out to a conclusion. The movie's end can only be reached if the agreement idea effecting it is maintained long enough that the culmination effect point is experienced. In the final analysis then, humanity decides as to its overall situation, but for those on their awareness processes, even though they may be part of the human experience, they are not resigned to it.